Greetings all, you have found the single truth. My name is John, and what we do here is get out the true word of the only true God that there is. Now, some people think there are many gods, and some people think they are even their own gods. But there is only one true God, and the way he reveals himself is through his word. And that's what our aim is here, is to get out his true word, God's truth, and not man's truth. Now, the Bible tells us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that's what we are going to cover over the next 2 to 3 episodes. What it takes to be wise, or what it takes to get wisdom. I have always heard the saying that with age comes wisdom. Okay, but I don't know if that's exactly true, because I know some old folks out there who ain't exactly the wisest owl in the parliament. Now, I've also learned over the years that with mistakes comes wisdom as well. That is, as long as you learn from those mistakes. Okay, but the saying I like to really go by is, the day you quit learning is the day they're putting you 6 feet under. You can always learn something. Now, I'm sure you probably heard some of those sayings as well, or maybe others, or maybe you even have your own little wisdom nuggets that you go by. Not to be confused with Weisenheimer nuggets or Weisenheimer sayings. You know, that's just being something totally different. But now let us turn to the Word of God, where we can really find true wisdom and find the wisdom that really counts. As I said in the introduction, this is probably going to be a 2 to 3 week series on wisdom, at least for the next 2 weeks anyway. Now, what I'm going to read from, most of the Proverbs I'm going to read from is going to be in the book of Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs was written by King Solomon, who was supposedly the wisest man who ever lived. However, he did do some dumb things. So in the book of 1 Kings, in the Old Testament, it tells us this: Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now that's 300 live-in girlfriends besides the 700 wives. So that's 1,000 women he's living with. Now that doesn't sound so wise to me, if you know what I'm saying. However, he did write some good things, and we're going to go over one right here, and that is in the book of Proverbs. We find that in the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7. And he says this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now, you can find similar verses saying the same thing throughout the Bible. But now let's take a closer look at Proverbs in general, and then we're going to go back to this one, because there's one particular word I want you to take notice of here. Now, there are 3 types of Proverbs, and they are usually written in couplet form, meaning they have 2 sayings or 2 statements within that proverb. So, for instance, the first one is contrasting. It's a contrasting proverb, and obviously that indicates the differences. It's contrasting the differences between those two statements, and it usually is indicated by the word but, okay, that's within the proverb, like the one I just read in Proverbs 1:7, and we'll get back to that one in a minute. Now, the second type of proverb is a comparing proverb, and what that is doing is that's comparing the similarities between the 2 statements, and those proverbs are usually indicated by the words as and so, or better and than. So I'll give you a couple examples here. In Proverbs 10:26, now again, this is comparing proverbs. As vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy man to those who send him. So it has the words as and so that's comparing. Now over here we have another one in Proverbs 15:16, and again, some of the indicating words is better and than, and you'll find that in this one. Again, Proverbs 15:16. Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure with trouble. So again, that's comparing 2 different things. And then the last one we have is what's called a complementing proverb. And what that is doing is the second statement is complementing the first. Okay, and that's usually indicated by the word and. And we find an example of that in Proverbs 10:22. And it says this: The blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. So again, that's a complimenting proverb. Now, we're going to go back to Proverbs 1:7, and we're going to reread that. And I want you, again, there's that word I want you to look at and take notice of and the meaning of it. Okay, so now let's get back to that. Okay, so we're going to go back to the first one I read, and again, that is a contrasting proverb. And again, remember that's indicated by the word but. So I'll read that one again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So I want to take a look at that word fool there. Okay, and again, that's a contrasting proverb because it has the word but. So that word fool, a little interesting side note, if you want to do a study on something, look up in the Bible how many times the word fool is mentioned, and then grab a Hebrew dictionary or a Greek dictionary, depending on what testament you're reading, to see what that word really means. So in this case, we're in the Old Testament, so it's a Hebrew word. So that Hebrew word, fool, and again, keep in mind that proverb, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So that word in Hebrew means perverse, okay? And it is spelled E-V-E-E-L in Hebrew. And I'm pretty sure that's pronounced evil, okay? And it's kind of close to, and this is where we get our English word evil, okay? So it's pronounced evil, whereas as we say evil. Coincidence? I think not, okay? Now here's how the Oxford Dictionary defines the word perverse. It is of a person or their actions showing a deliberate and obstinate desire to behave in a way that is unreasonable or unacceptable, often in spite of the consequences. So, does that not sound like evil? All right, now I know it's not Hitler evil, it's not Chuck Manson evil, but it's evil nonetheless. Regardless of the consequences, they don't care. The fools, the perverse people, evil people, don't care about the consequences. Now, do you think God kind of knew what he was doing when he inspired those words to be written? I think he did, okay? I do not think it's a coincidence. I'm going to say nay. I'm going to be a sayer of nay and say that God knew exactly what he was doing when he put that in there. Because if you go back and read that proverb, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay? And it's contrasting the fool who despises knowledge and instruction. And as we just read, that word fool means perverse in Hebrew, and it's somebody who does not care what actions they do regardless of the consequences. Now that is pretty foolish, what we would think of foolish as well. So I don't think those words, or I think those words were put in there specifically inspired, because it's just, again, no coincidence. That is divine intervention telling us, and that is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord, reverencing him, getting into his word, that's where we get knowledge and wisdom, not from the world, as those fools, those perverse people think they're doing the wise thing when they do that. But again, they're not. The beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. But again, fools despise wisdom and instruction. So hopefully you learned a little bit of knowledge today. I didn't want to go too deep with this first episode on it. Maybe over the next 2 or 3 we'll get a little bit deeper. I just kind of wanted to get your feet wet. Okay, so now that you know the 3 different types of proverbs, remember, contrasting, comparing, and complimenting. So now what do you do with that? What do you do with that knowledge? Well, first thing you got to do is you got to get into the Word of God. I know I say that all the time, but that's where you're going to find the wisdom. Okay, what does God tell us? Seek and ye shall find. The way you do that is get into His Word. Okay, that's where you find His wisdom. So put down the TV remote, put down the phone. Social media is going to be there when you're done. Okay, Put that down and get into the Word of God and get real, get helpful, get useful wisdom. Okay? Not the perverse, aka foolish, wisdom of the world. Don't be wise in the world's eyes, because they're usually fools, as the Bible tells us. So get into the Word of God and get His wisdom and not the world's. Seek and ye shall find. Now, as a non-believer, everything I just went over may sound foolish to you. In fact, the Bible tells us the world cannot understand God's wisdom. And in fact, sometimes it does not want to understand God's wisdom. Because again, like I said in the beginning, some people want to be their own gods, okay? But now if you want true wisdom, okay, if you want true wisdom that comes from the one who created wisdom, that is God, okay, turn your life over to Jesus, all right? Turn your life over to Him. He will give you that true wisdom that you need and hopefully that you want. Okay, now, if you don't want that true wisdom, if you want to be one of those perverse people that the Bible talked about, one of those fools of the world, if you want to be that way, despite the consequences that will come with your wisdom, with man's wisdom, if you want to be that way, then you can't cry foul when the consequences come. Okay, because man's wisdom is foolish, God's is not. So, if you're a non-believer, I would implore you, turn your life over to Jesus and He will give you the true wisdom that you really need. Okay, that's the wisdom that you need, not the world's.